The sun slipped slowly behind the jagged red cliffs as Carter guided his exhausted horse back toward the leaning fence of his ranch. Dust coated his boots and clung to his sleeves, mixing with sweat and weariness. The land had almost defeated him. The cattle were gone, scattered or sold. The fields dry and stubborn beneath the cracking sky. The windmill groaned above him, its broken blades creaking like something alive, whispering of better days that never came. Still, Elijah refused to abandon the only place his father had ever called home, the only patch of earth that remembered his name. As the last light drained from the horizon, he walked toward the creek with an empty tin bucket in hand. The world had gone quiet, too quiet for comfort. Then he felt it, a presence. The hair on his arms rose as a shadow stretched across the ground before him, long and impossibly tall. He turned slowly, and his breath caught in his chest. A woman stepped into the silver glow of the moon. She was Apache, her height and strength undeniable, her dark hair falling down her back like a river of night. Her eyes were fierce yet trembling, filled with both defiance and fear. She held no weapon, yet she looked more powerful than any man he had ever faced. "My name is Nantan," she said, her voice low and steady. "My people have chosen a husband for me, a war chief who sees me as a prize, not a woman. I fled. He will come. His trackers are close." Elijah knew what helping her meant. Settlers would call him a traitor. Soldiers would call him a fool. And the chief would call for his blood. But as he stood there, looking into her determined eyes, he saw more than an Apache woman on the run. He saw someone who refused to be owned. "I would rather die free," she added softly, her words carried by the night wind. For a long moment, Elijah said nothing. He looked back at the weather-beaten house, the dry fields, the lonely life that waited for him. Then he turned back to her. "Then you won't be his," he said. "You'll be mine." She blinked, confused. "What do you mean, mine?" "I'll marry you," he continued, surprising even himself. "A white rancher's wife is protected. Your people won't dare take you without dishonoring their own laws. It'll just be a lie, a shield to keep you safe." The silence between them felt heavy with fate. Finally, Nantan gave a slow, thoughtful nod. "Then for now," she whispered, stepping closer, "you are my husband." And somewhere beyond the ridgeline, hidden among the rocks and shadows, unseen eyes watched, waiting for the moment to strike. Morning light crept over the desert like a hesitant witness as Elijah and Nantan rode slowly toward the small frontier town. Their shoulders were stiff, their expressions guarded, but they kept close enough for anyone, watching to believe the story they were about to tell. Dust swirled around the horses' legs while the wooden buildings ahead sat in silent judgment. Elijah could feel eyes on his back the moment they entered the main road. Men paused mid-step, women froze in doorways, and whispers fluttered through the air like startled birds. A poor rancher returning with a towering Apache woman at his side was a sight no one had imagined seeing. Inside the chapel, the preacher's hands trembled. He had buried outlaws, married strangers, and blessed soldiers, but never had he stood between two worlds like this. Elijah slipped his last silver coin onto the small table, and the preacher nodded, too frightened to ask questions. The ceremony was brief, held under a cracked wooden cross as sunlight filtered through broken glass. There was no music, no celebration, just the sound of breath and the beating of anxious hearts as the vows were spoken. When it was done, a strange quiet settled, as if the earth itself had accepted the bond. But far beyond the town, fury was already rising. Takale, the war chief who had claimed Nantan, stood in the center of the Apache camp as the news reached him. His mouth tightened, his eyes burning with humiliation. He had waited for Nantan not for love but power, not for a wife but a symbol. Now that symbol stood beside a white rancher. It was an insult that could not go unanswered. He gathered his strongest warriors, their horses snorting and stamping as they prepared for the ride to Elijah's land. Back at the ranch, the world felt fragile. Nantan sat by the small fire as shadows danced along the ground. Elijah handed her a cup of dark, bitter coffee, their fingers brushing for the first time. Neither spoke for a moment. "You could still leave," he said quietly. "Once the danger passes." She shook her head. "If I leave you, their anger will find me again. In my world, a bond like this cannot be undone without blood." She looked at him then, her gaze steady. Whether it was born from truth or a lie no longer matters. The silence was broken by a low rumble in the distance. Hooves, many of them. The ground itself seemed to tremble beneath the coming storm. "They are here," she said, rising to her full height, her shadow stretching over the land. Elijah reached for his rifle, heart pounding, and stepped beside her. "Then they will have to come through both of us," he replied. And together they faced the darkness racing toward their door. The first light of dawn bled across the horizon as hooves pounded into the earth. Around the ranch, dust rose like smoke, and dark figures formed a circle in the pale morning glow. Elijah stood on the porch, his rifle heavy in his hands, though his palms were slick with sweat. Beside him, Nantan remained still, her posture unshaken, her eyes fixed on the approaching chief. There was no fear in her stance, only a calm strength that seemed to carry the weight of generations. Takali rode forward, his expression carved in stone, his shoulders broad beneath painted markings of anger and insult. He dismounted slowly, as though the air itself had bowed to his will. His gaze moved from Elijah to Nantan, narrowing when he saw the way she stood beside the rancher. Not behind him, not beneath him. "You stand on borrowed ground, woman," he said. "You were promised before the spirits, before the elders, before your name could be spoken in defiance." "I was never yours," Nantan replied, her voice steady and clear. "Not by spirit, not by heart, not by choice." Takala's eyes flashed toward Elijah. "Then you," he growled, "are the thief who believes a lie makes him powerful." Elijah lifted his chin. "I don't believe I own her," he answered. "I believe she chose for herself, and I stand with that choice." A murmur rippled through the warriors. Takali understood their hesitation. To take Nantan now, after a marriage had been spoken, even one to an outsider, would mark him as a breaker of sacred bonds. Strength in a leader did not only come from battle, but from respect for the old ways. He took a slow step closer, stopping only a few feet from her towering form. "If you stay here," he said quietly, "you belong to neither world. You will walk between fire and storm." Nantan did not look away. "Then I will learn to command both," she replied. For a long, heavy moment, the world seemed to hang in silence. Then Takali turned his back. He raised a hand, signaling the warriors. One by one, the circle broke, the horses shifting, turning, retreating. Dust drifted away behind them like the fading echo of a threat. When the land finally grew still again, Elijah exhaled, not realizing he'd been holding his breath. His legs felt weak, but he remained standing. "They're gone," he murmured. Nantan looked at the open plain, then down at the worn boards of the porch. "No," she said softly. "They have chosen not to return." Days turned into weeks, and the ranch no longer felt like an empty burden. Nantan understood the land in ways Elijah never had. She showed him where the soil held hidden moisture, which plants could heal, and when the winds would change. The earth slowly answered her, and in return, it gave them life again. One evening, as the sun painted the sky in gold and crimson, Elijah watched her walk through the tall grass and realized the truth. The marriage that had begun as a lie was no longer pretend, and somewhere in the stillness of the land, he knew she understood I.